Everyone. Good morning. How's everybody? Such a beautiful morning, isn't it? Yeah. You'll be out there in just a little bit to enjoy some of it. Today we have a very important one item. Actually, we have an executive session after this, but a very important item on our agenda today, and we want to get straight to it. And the first agenda item is the TLRC Children's Services Levy Report and Recommendations. Lisa Webb, Assistant County Administrator, and Gwen McFarland, the TLRC Chair, is here to speak today. So welcome.
Thank you,
And then we
Commissioners.
have some other people with you.
They will be coming up, I'm sure. I just want
Okay.
to note, all four members of the TLRC subcommittee are present for this discussion as well, given the gravitas of it. Thank you, Commissioners. I'm going to give a very brief introduction and then turn this presentation over to the Tax Levy Committee subcommittee members to present. Just wanted to give a little bit of background on the Children's Services Levy and specifically the work of the Tax Levy Review Committee towards this report. This report is the culmination of about 14 months worth of work by this fully volunteer committee, hours upon hours of meetings and conversations with the other TLRC members, with the public, and specifically with JFS and the subject matter experts within JFS. Of note, there are 12 pages in this review, but the hours of meetings and conversations and dives into the analysis of the services that an agency does related to the levies is on a scale that we have not seen in prior levy reviews. So I just want to be very thankful of them and their time and work towards getting this report, which was just approved by the Tax Levy Review Committee yesterday evening.
Could you tell me who the other two members are?
Absolutely, absolutely. Gwen McFarland, who's the chair of the Tax Levy Review Committee, as well as the Subcommittee on Children's Services Levy, Jenny O'Donnell, as well Eric Landon, and Rabbi Bob Barr, who is one of our newest members of the Tax Levy Review Committee. This is his first
Thank you. I
review.
appreciate
And
it.
with that, I will go ahead and turn it over, I believe, Gwen and Jenny here. And I will run the.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
So thank you for that introduction, Lisa, and I really want to give a shout out to the rest of the subcommittee for being here today. As Lisa said, this has been a pretty grueling marathon to get to this point, and I would strongly recommend that the report in front of you is our TLRC's 12-page report, but there's this massive report from PCG, and you'll see one from Clark Schaefer Hackett as well. So it's, I mean, we could only summarize that so much. There's really a lot more information. So I want to start with just a little tiny history. In 2018, which is when I first came on TLRC, we looked at the Children's Services Levy and found then that it was underfunded. And by that I mean the cost of services, the volume of the services needed, the number of children and family coming into the system had outgrown the amount of money that had been approved by the taxpayers in the 1996 levy. So that was about a 14-year span. Here we are, 2018, 2026. There's no surprises here, right? It's another long span of time where we haven't had a very significant change in the levy. We are looking at right now 81 million in consolidated funds that is going to JFS from the levy each year. That's an important number, the 81 million, because what you'll see is how that factors into the recommendations both from PCG and the Tax Levy Review Committee as we go on. So it's also important to remember that unlike all the other levies that we look at in Hamilton County, the Hamilton County Jobs and Family Services Levy is actually funding a county department. So these are your colleagues, your employees, your programs, and also you'll hear us keep talking about mandated services. So by that, I've learned that means services that were handed down from the requirements handed down from the federal government and the state government to the counties to deliver, of course, with little to no funding. So unfunded mandates is how I like to refer to them when I'm talking to my neighbors. That means that we, as a county, have to pay for those services by hook or by crook, right? So we are either paying for them through the general fund or through this levy. So we started our levy review in March of 2025, and we started with what was a regularly scheduled midpoint review. And during that midpoint review, I don't know if you remember, but I proposed when I brought my report back from the midpoint review that we actually fast track a full review and bring PCG in earlier and start to look at the numbers earlier, because we could see this escalation in the cost of JFS services. We did that. So we initiated PCG coming in. They provided, you probably have it in front of you, it's a huge binder, 100 pages or so, lots of charts. It's really important stuff in there. And the TLRC was kind of struck by the volume of changes that JFS was trying to juggle to deliver services to our most important kids, right? Our kids and families that are in dire circumstances by definition. So when we began the review and we walked through so much information from PCG, really where we came out was that we needed to consider multiple factors that were contributing to the escalating costs. One of the first costs, of course, is increase in users. So the number of children and families coming in through JFS has increased. Okay, we all understand that. But we also needed to look at the financial picture. And since 2018 to now, we can all think for ourselves about the increased costs to our own homes, to our own circumstances. JFS is experiencing that just naturally with inflation, but also some external forces that are pushing these costs. One is an increased level of professionalism. Nobody's complaining about that. Increased level of professionalism in the system. And that's because certification criteria has increased, requiring stricter mandates on the type of professional who are serving these children. The criteria to get licensed as an entity, as a care providing congregate care living facility, those criteria are increasing, making it more expensive for those care home providers to provide their services. So their contract costs were beginning to creep up. That's one major factor that JFS has no control over unless someone caps those costs. The local JFS provider has no control over capping those costs, but as we learned through JFS and from PCG, there's a statewide movement to create something called a rate card. The rate card is coming in at the state level because, of course, we're not the only county in this scenario. We're only speaking about Hamilton County today, but as part of our review, we've looked at counties all over the state, urban counties, suburban counties, rural counties. They're all struggling. Their JFS costs are accelerating way beyond what they had projected. That rate card is a little bit longer term. I would call it maybe a short long-term solution. It's got to go through our elected officials at the state to set the prices for projecting our future costs on residential care. So that rate card, it's not in effect right now, and nobody knows where those rates are going to come down. We don't, what is the compromise that will be reached to set that rate card. So it's important to know that the rate card will help us because it will help us with future projections, but it's likely to be set at current day costs. It's not going to be set at 2018 cost or 2022 cost. It'll be set at current day costs. those costs have gone up significantly. The other thing that is driving, we think, some of the cost situation is the Title IV-E program. And in my report, I tried to explain to person who is not involved in the system what Title IV-E is. It's a funding reimbursement program for families who qualify, and then for services that are approved to be in Title IV-E. So does it sound like insurance to you? Because that's kind of what it sounded like to me. These are pre-approved providers for families that are pre-approved for the plan. If we can increase the number of families who are receiving, who qualify for Title IV-E benefits, we can pull more money from the state and the federal government back into our county. But there's a lot of hoops to go through. So you'll see later in our recommendations that we have some recommendations to try to improve our Title IV-E qualifying families. When we also know that there is currently a heavy reliance on single source contracts. Remember I talked about the rate cards just a second ago. JFS writes contracts with the residential care providers to set the rates for their kids from Hamilton County. If I understand it correctly, all the counties do this. They enter into contracts with the providers, but then the providers the counties are all competing for these providers. So competition drives costs. And we don't have enough providers. So we're seeing that's another factor that's influencing these increasing costs. To make it more complicated, our kiddos who went through COVID and lots of trauma are getting more and more complicated for providing the level of care that those kids need, that those kids and frankly those families need. Because we're all about family reunification. In fact, we have the best kinship program in the country in Hamilton County, trying to keep families together. But these kids are complicated. I see them in my day job, not in Hamilton County, but in outlying counties. They've got a lot going on, and it's hard for these families. Those kids with this, what we call higher acuity needs, that's the clinical lingo for it. I know Commissioner Dumas understands that. Those kids are requiring these higher level of care, even higher than we contracted for in the original residential care provider contracts. So the residential care providers are saying, well, we know you have this contract for these services, but you're going to need all these services. You're going to get out of your contract. You're going to get into a single-use contract with us. Those contracts are extremely expensive. And this all comes down to we don't have the continuum of care available for JFS within our system. We're having to sort of create these care models, kind of ad hoc, if you will. That's an expensive way to do things. Okay, I have a couple of charts in here that I hope explain some of the things that I've just talked about. One is this one, the types of placement that we're talking about here today. Foster homes are licensed foster care providers, adults, of course, and they are providing care not for kids from their family, but kids that they're bringing in. That category is costing us approximately $41,000 per child per year. And then the kinship home is right underneath it. 36% of our kids are in there. If you notice, that's almost, 71, carry the one, a little over 80% of the kids in our system. When I think about that, I see that as a victory, right? We're keeping kids in homes. So we need to, as a system, concentrate on making sure those services are not only available, but they're robust and they're healthy, and we're attracting more folks to that end of the model. Now, it's this next 20% that we go down through, and I'm not going to go through each one of those, but that's where we're trying to contain costs. Those are the kiddos that are really, frankly, having too many struggles to stay in a foster home. We need all the kids in the foster home to be safe, for instance. So we are mostly focusing our recommendations on the services, the financial aspects of the bottom 4 categories. But we are applauding loudly the services that are provided in Hamilton County on those top 2 categories. It's really important. Okay, then the next couple of paragraphs are about that topic of Title E that I talked about. There's some federal, it's actually over my head, how complicated that Title IV-E is. But know that a kid cannot qualify for Title IV-E benefits, insurance, whatever we want to call it, after the family's certain financial level. You'll see later, I'm going to call on you all to help us lobby the federal government to right-size these requirements for Title IV-E. They haven't been changed to what I understand is 25 years, so they haven't met the reality of our family's financial situations. You can see in the next slide, the rising cost of care right here. This is a dramatic picture that we saw back at the beginning in our midterm review that necessitated us triggering the full review. This is what we saw, and we knew we were in trouble. Remember the $81 million number that I told you in the beginning? If you look at the 2025 actual, it says 93 million. Okay, so I've gone over some of the reasons that these costs of care have increased. I've also, I think, applauded loudly the quality of services that we're trying to maintain. Now let's talk about what we did as soon as sort of the flags went up, right? The fire bell went off. The first thing JFS did is come to y'all, and you quite clearly said, oh, we have got to fix this. And you asked JFS to make a $36 million cut in their spending. This next table talks about the reductions that were made by JFS. Remember, all the staff at JFS, every single one we've met, is trying to balance what is in the best interest of that child. And we all know the kind of child that we're talking about, right? Someone who's in trauma, someone who's in crisis. What do they need in the moment? We can't have them sleeping in our brand new, beautiful JFS building, right? We have to get them into placement. So that's what our JFS workers are thinking about. And then those of us on the TLRC and all of you are also thinking about the cost of all that. The $36 million that was cut was mostly cut for prevention services. That breaks my heart. What we want is to stop children and families from coming in to the JFS system. And our prevention services, the data, the outcome measures from our prevention services say it's working. We just cut it. It's very important to keep that in mind as we continue here. We reduced the top 9 lines on this table. We then transferred to the general fund the TANF match and the juvenile court placement costs, the guardian ad litem costs. We transferred those to the general fund. So when you look at this, you begin to think everybody's giving, right? Everybody's giving here. We also transferred to 2 different levies that the TLRC is involved in. We transferred about, I'm going to lose that number. It's not in my head. 2, okay, so 3, about $6 million from 2 of our other levies. I have more to say about that in my recommendations. But we were trying. We were taking $36 million out of the Children's Services Levy Fund and getting it, trying to stop the flow, right? The outflow. JFS has since told us, because we've had almost one full quarter, that in fact they're seeing a good financial outcome from these cuts. They're seeing some positive returns on that. Of course, I want to put those services back in place. See me after so we can talk about that. We are going to continue those cuts out of this levy, most of those cuts that in our recommendations. We want to figure out another way to keep those prevention services coming, but we don't believe this levy can afford to keep those services in. We are recommending, well, JFS has already put in place a hiring freeze, limited advancement, like I said, diverting the costs to other levies. They are trying some new things for some of the housing things that were cut out of here, mostly for our transitioning youth, our older teens. That group needs a really special set of services. We're trying to find those in other ways. So some of those cuts can be restored with some great creativity and maybe some new partners. JFS is working with juvenile court on the Title IV-E process. We're trying to tighten that up. They have some good news about that. I think that they'll be coming forth with. We also asked JFS to look into how do you determine when a family actually comes into JFS care? We know that, I mean, at least as a mental health provider, I call 241 Kids. That sets off, I'm a mandated reporter, so that sets off a series of steps, and the case is examined. We asked JFS to look at that piece. Is there a way, can we find some ideas that would allow a youth or a family to get some support before they come into JFS care and under this levy funding? JFS is doing that. We hosted 2 public meetings. We got great stories about the success. Unfortunately for me, it was about the success of those services we just cut, which is why I really am pleading that as a community, as the larger community, we come up with some ideas on how to fund those things. The other thing that came out of our midterm and then our subsequent review is we wanted a financial analysis, a deeper dive on the finances. And so the county hired Clark Schaefer Hackett. And I'm going to let Gwen McFarland come and talk to you about that.
Thank you, Jenny. I'll just slow the pace down just a moment. First of all, I want to thank the county commissioners for really pushing for a third-party independent review, because what that did was just resonated and helped us clarify more the data in relationship to the financial situation, the dashboards that we were presented with. And by requesting that report, that helped us help you to get a better picture of where the money goes, because basically that was the fundamental role of that third-party independent review. So as you know, the Clark Schaefer Review consultant reported last Tuesday to the county commissioners. And that report really solidified a much deeper analysis of JFS finances, which we already were aware of, and county audits, as well as the review of the PCG consultant report, which also looked at all of the data that we had been processing through, paging through, leafing through, and et cetera. As a result, Clark Schaefer executive summary focused. The highlights of that report was the executive summary. And the independent review confirms the decline of the fund balance, driven almost entirely, as you had seen by the previous slide, by out-of-home placements. And when we look at out-of-home placements, the families are doing an excellent job trying to handle some of the complexities of the children that they are seeing. But when it gets to the point, if they're not prepared on how to handle those children, then it becomes very complex for them, and that's where you see the out-of-home placement data, which I think is important. And the report finds no issues at all with the data or financial reporting. And it also looked at there are opportunities for all of us to strengthen and oversight the out-of-home care and contract services. That is really, really critical. So with the report, they also looked at the levy spending findings, and they reported that the levy budget ran under plan in 2022 and 23, but then significantly exceeded the plan in 24-25, and looked at how those revenues increased over the few years, but it was at a slower pace. So again, it provided a better picture of where the money's gone. It zeroed in on those areas. That was an out-of-home care, which doubled during the levy period. Lending spending of about 52% of the total levy actuals. So when you look at there was 100 and some vendors that were providing services. The top 6 vendors drove over half of the spending. Now, when you look at the top 6 vendors, you have to take into consideration the complexity of these children, the complexity that they bring to the table, the acuity level meaning they have a lot of psychological issues, behavioral issues. So those who are not used to the word acuity, that's what that means. It really means that those issues and what those kids bring to the table was phenomenally outstanding. So again, the kinship programming also grew from 0.5 million to 8 million as the county program was increased. And this also aligns with the PCG report and the findings that 38% of our Hamilton County placements are with kin. Now, and again, we celebrate how far we've come with the kinship program. What we have to look at now is, again, the complexity of those kids who are coming in sitting at the table. And many of those kins, and I'll just say auntie or maybe grandma, cannot handle those behavioral issues. They try their best to do it, but they're doing well. But we need to look at perhaps training our family members, grandma, auntie, how to handle these kids, and maybe they can hold on to them a little bit longer. So the top 3 contract services categories in the report focused on behavioral health, which is what we've been sharing with you all, and other county services. And we looked at juvenile court. I had the awesome opportunity to sit in a couple juvenile court hearings, and it was a learning experience for me to sit in that room, and you see basically the magistrate, you see the prosecutor, you see the family, you see the guardian and other aligning services. And when you look at how much time that takes with all of those individuals trying to help keep this kid together, it takes time. And so that time normally results in the kid still being in foster care or in a kinship program. So basically it's trying to look at some type of intervention with all of those people together to help put that kid back together again. So behavioral services nearly quadrupled at the current levy. And so that's why I'm saying to you, the complexity of those kids is just amazingly complex. And the most important thing is you want to try and put together an intervention program in some form or fashion to help that kid when they get to be, and before they get to 18 years of age, so that when they begin to transition from 18 to 22, they have the basic fundamental intervention tools to help them learn how to cope and move on with their lives. And some of the public hearings that we've had, there were some individuals who had gone through the total program and were able to tell their story. And when they told their story, several of them were going to college now and planning to graduate. So they didn't go into another route, which we won't discuss. They went forward based on the intervention tools that were put into place and the working with the juvenile court system as well. So I just wanted to, again, thank you all as county commissioners for pushing for this independent review. And now I'm going to turn it back to Jenny so that she can give you the TLRC recommendations. Thank you very much.
Okay. So we've got a couple more pages, but so the TLRC recommendations are complicated. It's a lot longer than we usually do because we recognize there's no one problem here. There's no one fix-all, right? There's a lot of moving parts, and we're recommending a lot of people take some action. We know that this levy, we know that the service system, not just the levy, right, but the entire service system is at an inflection point. You'll hear that in our recommendations. We're asking for a lot of hands to help here. The amount of the levy has not been raised since 2018. The purchasing power of $100 in 2018 would now cost us $122. So we need to think about that, right? All that said, that's just straight inflation. That's not these extra external forces that we've gone over. We need to continue investing in prevention, and you know, as I said, we made those cuts. That's not because we don't believe in prevention. We do believe in prevention. We're just trying to get through the crisis, much like our JFS care workers are every day. So JFS shared their most recent projections on May 4th, 2026 at our TLRC meeting. And they showed a projected range of current year expenses between $157.8 million and $186.6 million. That's their projections. Remember what I told you at the beginning. We're currently funding 81 million of those costs. So if we look at 157.8 million, which is the low number, we need to think about how do we get there. The ongoing revenues to support the JFS expenses total 116 million, current levy revenues of 81 million, and then 35 million of other revenues. It's important to note that the levy revenues have not increased since 2018. So as you know, those numbers are not enough to meet our current costs. The TLRC recommends that at a minimum, the commissioners consider an increase of the levy to support the JFS base 2026 projection amount of $157.8 million with annual expenditure increases of 4%. In addition, the TLRC recommends this increase over JFS's base 2025 projection amount of $157.8 million. We want to claw back $3.2 million from the service costs that were diverted to the other two levies. As TLRC members, we know how tight those other two levies are, and we're trying to protect all of them. So that's where that 3.2 million recommendation increase comes from. It's the we're trying to protect the indigent care and family services and treatment levies. We're trying to hopefully alleviate a downstream problem with this recommendation. So in total, our recommendation is that JFS has a need of $161 million in total revenue to support children's services, taking into account the $35 million JFS receives in other revenues, the TLRC is recommending the total amount needed in the levy funds is $144 million. So this level of increase would provide for a base level of funding for the mandated services. We're not talking about non-mandated services here. We're talking about the mandated services, and allows the restoration of the 3-month reserve of funding that based on y'all's financial outlay method, there needs to be a 3-month fund balance carried into the next fiscal year. Here's the map. If you look here, we're looking at keeping the levy revenue at $144 million for 27 through 31. We're hoping that that allows for that 3-month rollover fund balance. Thank you. And that would require an increase in our property tax levy. This will still mean hard choices for JFS. We still have about a $33 million cut annually. Well, the $36 million cut that we talked about earlier now be reduced a little bit, but it does not fund non-mandated services. The TLRC is hopeful with continuing monitoring, which we would increase to annual. We had been doing it at the midpoint, and then for the final, TLRC is recommending that we engage in this monitoring every year now with JFS. And then we have 2 pages of recommendations as well. We have some short-term recommendations that we hope to see. One is that we fill the JFS director position with someone who's invested in a long-term commitment to the agency and will be deliberative about the difference between a maximalist risk mitigation approach, oh, here's a kid, let's just get them in the the Mac Daddy program. I'm not saying that that's what JFS is doing now. That's not at all what is happening. But we have to be very aware that every decision that every worker at JFS makes every day costs money. We as the community need to provide JFS with a series of steps for a youth to have the appropriate size services for every single step along the way. Sometimes we don't have that. Sometimes we only have kinship to this very expensive residential situation. That's on us. We have to build a system. Of course, that's a long-term plan. We have to, as a system, recognize that there's a risk mitigation philosophy that we're following, and we have to equate it to our minimalist financial burden. It's very hard to do. We need a director who understands that and can do that. We are asking to continue maintaining services at the reduced level to restore the fiscal stability through the end of this year, and JFS has already agreed that they're going to do that, and they think that they can. As I said, we want to conduct a full review of the non-mandated services, and we want the commissioners to hear that full review of those non-mandated services, to think creatively about how we can implement them in our county for our families and our residents. We want to work with juvenile court to strengthen that Title IV claims and eligibility processes, including determining if more resources are needed in juvenile court. I mean, maybe we need a new magistrate, maybe we need, who knows what we need, but we need to work with them to help them and JFS work that through. We want to train all of JFS staff on the intersection between this risk-taking, decision-making, and the costs that come with it. For instance, if a child is in one of these residential care settings and we've determined that this child is now maybe had the appropriate medication and started to calm down and is ready to transition to a lower restrictive setting or a less intensive setting, we need our JFS workers to make that a higher priority because the daily cost is so high on those services. We want to reduce the reliance on those single source contracts that I was talking about. We need to see that as a last resort, and we need to figure out a mechanism to track that carefully to minimize that happening. And then lastly, on the short-term recommendations, we hope that JFS can complete their strategic plan. I think that's tied back into the director and lots of other things, but we think that that's extremely important. They've told us it's underway. We believe it's going to be, that's maybe one of the low-hanging fruits on this list. We have the annual recommendations. We'd like JFS will use the county's annual budget process to review their current spending and revenue trends and balance those with the projected levy needs. We're trying to get out ahead of these surprises, these financial surprises. Any addition of non-mandated services or increases to the current non-mandated services should be reported to the commissioners through the process. And as I said, TLRC is committing to do an annual review of the budget and the programming and spending so that we can also keep our county commissioners aware of how this is proceeding. We have long-term recommendations as well. We hope that we can increase collaboration with the community to determine some community goals for every family involved and partnering with like-minded nonprofits to help achieve some of these services that have been cut, or that maybe even some of the mandated services that we can support through other means. Maybe there's a nonprofit that can help with some small piece of it, because we really are looking at chipping away around the edges here to keep these costs controlled. We want to go back to some kind of a dashboard, some kind of a metrics that the public can see that's very clear about what JFS is doing to maintain the certification standards, attainable standards. They're reporting a lot of this information already in their certification requirements, but let's let the public see these things, but also let's let the community partners and the public contribute to what information they do want to see. Let's bring a round table. Let's bring some partners together so JFS doesn't feel like they're in this alone. We want to talk about reunification rates and graduation rates. That was so powerful to hear those stories. As somebody in the trenches, it's nice to hear the victory stories, right? So we want to make sure that the public hears that too, and of course our commissioners. Because we're all doing such good work, let's scream about it. Let's not just be quiet about it. We also want to track what we're very concerned about. Incarceration rates, putting our children in detention, relapse and recidivism. Unfortunately, we are talking about that with these kiddos, right? We're talking about drug and alcohol abuse and criminal activity and ongoing abuse in their settings. So let's talk about that so that we all know how serious that problem is. We'd like to expand recruitment and retention of foster and kinship caregiver programs. That's one of the recommendations that came from one of our newest TLRC committee members, and I applaud that. Let's be creative there. We know that that's our most cost effective, but also for the bleeding hearts in the room, that's what's best for the kids. So let's see if we can increase the foster and kinship program even further. We also put the recommendation of we want JFS to lead and collaborate with the community to build investment in a sustainable prevention service continuum. You've heard me talk about these transitions, right? This I'm talking about is keeping the kids out of the JFS system. Can we create, maybe this isn't novel, right? But can we create a system in front of that 241 kids call that starts before JFS has to take these kids in? And we have some brilliant minds in this county. Let's get them together and solve this problem. We also, and this is where I'm calling on my elected officials, we want more advocacy at the state level. We want our state representatives, commissioners, etc., to advocate at the state level for the rate reform card, expanded reimbursement, and improved access to Ohio Rise services and related programs. Ohio is ranked second lowest in the country in contributions to child welfare. We're at about 18%. The average state contribution is 42%. We need to be heard at the state level about this. We also need changes in the state and federal levels on the Title IV-E legislation. We're going to need senators and congressmen to help us with that, congresswomen, if I have anything to say about it. So we've got some work ahead of us as a community. And I mentioned that capped rate card. We need to stay on that and make sure that that rate card goes through. I think that it will. Our state elected leaders seem to be positive about that. But this is something we all have to keep foremost in our thinking. That's the end of our report. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much for the thorough report, and thank you, Gwen, also for your information. I will open it up for whoever is going to be there to answer the questions or comments. Vice President Reese.
Thank you. I want to thank TLRC for very difficult work that you all have to do, and thank you for lending your expertise and volunteering in that capacity. I think it's very important. Our children are definitely important, and the other levies that handle indigent care, the hospital levy, and as well as the levy that deals with developmental disabilities and senior citizens, they are all important. One of the things I wanted to ask, you gave a total number. What is the percentage of the levy increase? What would that percentage, what is that?
I'd have to do a calculation to come up with the percentage, but the levy brings in about $81 million currently. The $144 million increase is just over a $60 million additional revenues.
Okay, because that's what the citizens are going to want to hear. $100,000 home does not exist anymore, very seldom. So we used those things years ago because that was a big deal. If you can get a $100,000 home, boy, you made it. I'll give you an example. In Evanston, for example, they want $800,000 for a home to live in Evanston. Madisonville, they're up to $850,000, and these aren't mansions, let alone what you would do in Walnut Hills and East Walnut Hills. And of course, we go all the way out through the counties. So the value of the homes are a lot higher. And so I want to make sure, because we always say, oh, $100,000 home is only $22 more. And when they get their tax bill, these homes are at $300,000 to $800,000. So I want to make sure we're talking apples to apples for this particular economy.
Absolutely.
So if we can get that, what's the percentage that we'd be asked to do?
I can get that.
20%, 10%, 50%, I don't know. Okay, so that's one item. Secondly, I want to thank, I did see the report, Clark, Schaefer, and Hackett. Thought that was a good report. However, we lumped the three top contracts, we lumped them, and there's no way in the world that behavioral health contract would be as big as youth employment. There's no way. I'm looking at the youth employment contract. So maybe not today, but I like to pull that out because you lump it all in and say, oh man, youth employment is very small compared to the juvenile court. That's because these are very highly specific, types of help that occur. So I want to pull,
That additional data.
yeah, I want to pull that out. That can't be accurate. Youth employment is like $1 million. I mean, it's not, so it can't be the highest. The other thing that I wanted to say, we want to make sure that the people who have been our champions, and I first want to thank the taxpayers of Hamilton County because they have passed these levies. And we're in a climate now where these taxes is just so high on people losing their homes. And so they have to make some tough decisions. And we want to make sure that our folks that's been with us do not become our adversaries. And we're seeing that around the state. These levies are, some of them going down that would never have a chance of going down, but people are having to choose because gas is $4 a gallon and going to get milk and eggs cost a lot, and the property tax issue has not been fixed. There's no relief. And so people are concerned. Now, I'm going to say that as we look into the future, which I would like to see Hackett or somebody work with our TLRC folks, in my opinion and what I'm hearing from folks, this is not me personally, what I'm hearing from people, said, Reese, I've been with you, but I can't do it this time. And I've got to convince them to do it this time. We have to look futuristically. The days of depending on real estate taxes to pay for everything is coming to an end. Whether these people get on the ballot or not, they're not going to stop. It's coming to an end. And so we need to look forward thinking, even beyond this levy, because we got some other levies coming, and have a real entity come in and help us on how can we move to a new model to fund these things, but not on the rubber band that's getting ready to break, which is called real estate taxes. It's not just here, it's all over the country. So we know things are coming, and we've got to look more, as Dr. O'Donnell said, we got to look at these foundations. We've got to, I've asked Mr. Ludo, we got to look at, can we float some bonds? We've got to look at the governor, can we do some loans, a $1 loan for 100 years? We have to come up with some new ways because the rubber band is going to break. We can't wait for it to break. Then we say, oh man. So this is for everybody, schools, everybody, all the things we care about. It's like AI is here. People say, oh, AI, you better learn AI because it's here. Cell phones, people, oh, don't do them cell phones. Cell phones are now here, you got to have them. We went from horse and buggy to cars. It's here. So the days of depending on real estate folks, real estate taxes to pay for everything is coming to an end. And even new real estate we're always abating it. Not us, but they're debating it. So that means it ain't there. So I would like the TLRC, and through, I would recommend this, we need to hire somebody to come in and work with TLRC expertise on the next wave of how do we fund these things without the dependency of going up on the real estate taxes. So that's my first item. My second item is we combined two taxes when I got here. We were celebrating it, we done combined them, and oh man, we doing this, we doing that, and we had $100 million as of 2024, December, in the reserve. At $100 million. In fact, I was looking at giving some of it back. 50% of it, because I knew the homeowners were struggling. And somehow, when I said that, we went from, all of a sudden, we went in 2025, we broke. And some people believe, wait a minute, just in time for the levy, we broke, but we was just celebrating and creating new projects because we thought prevention was definitely important. And now we went from $100 million, and then we went down to, we owe $30 million. Now the question is, you'll say, well, cost went up. It went up in 6 months, maybe it did. I think, and then I said, well, if we go forward with this, we must be able to answer the question to the taxpayer. Because they can't just say, go, how are we gonna stop the bleed? How do we stop what happened December 2024, $100 million in reserve? And let's create some programs for prevention, which is important, to now a year later, 2025, not only did we spend up the money, but we spent up the 100 million and owe 30 million. So the question becomes, we have to have a statement or something on how do we stop it. So one of the questions was we would have kinship program, which I really think is phenomenal. But then Clark, Schaefer, who is it, Hackett, they come back and say one of the problems is that we're doing so well in kinship or something. Their kinship costs, they put the cost of kinship. It said it grew to $8 million. It grew. So my point is, if that's the answer, it would grow, obviously, if we get more people doing that. But this is what their report said. Kinship grew from 0.5 million to 8 million. And so I just want to make sure, maybe that needs to be clarified. Because I want kinship. Is kinship part of our answer to drive the cost down?
You're accurate, Commissioner. Clark Schaefer Hackett's report reported strictly on the financials. That is where the spend is. That is not to say that there is a problem with us spending additional money and encouraging kinship, and having 38%, the highest county in the state. We should be lauded for that, and I think Dr. O'Donnell specified that within there. But it is a spend category. Clark Schaefer Hackett's report specifically looked at what the spend drivers are and what is causing that cost increase. That is something that has caused a cost increase. Now, that's not to say that if we hadn't had that kinship, that we wouldn't be spending even more in other out-of-home care costs. Even foster care is significantly more expensive than kinship. But those costs have risen. Kinship has risen as we've encouraged kinship in the community.
Yeah, in their report, it needs to be an asterisk, because we got to have a real message to people. People, they are not, they don't have time to dissect all this. They need a clear message. Is kinship what we're going to do to help stop the bleeding? We got to come up with what's going to stop the bleeding. If we're saying cost is going up and we are not going to be able to control those costs, then someone saying, I can't just give you a blank check to keep going up. We got to come up with something to say, we're going to do X. Kinship, if it is, I guess that's, if we're going to be out there saying it, we got to make sure that, what is these people? Clark, Schaefer, and Hackett. We can't have people come here and say kinship is too expensive. So they need an asterisk in their report. And then we need to make sure that that's whatever that message is. Because if you just pull out their report, which I just did, we're looking at, they got kinship as one of the problems of costing more. So we just need to have some asterisks with one set of message, whether you pull this Hackett report, whether you pull the TLRC report, or whether we're saying it, if we're promoting that kinship is going to be one of the things to help solve this problem, we need to be on the same page. And then my last question is, you said that this, your recommended increase would only be mandated services. So the non-mandated, such as what? We wouldn't be able to do what? Youth employment? Will we be able to do those things? We won't be able to do anything.
So the non-mandated services, that's these, right? To some extent, yeah. The independent living contracts for the youth 18 to 21, some of the payments to the kinship families, they're changing the calculation for that. Vouchers for children's services families, reduction in caseworker reimbursement, reduction in service contracts to partners, nonprofit partners, such as, I don't know what the K is.
Kids in school role.
Kids in School role, and the Family Success Network. The hiring slowdown obviously is part of the reduction. These are all things that JFS has the ability to manage. A reduction in budget to child support enforcement programming. These are not mandated services, so JFS has some power to cut those services and manage those services. There's also the youth employment program, which is not a mandated services, so that has, as part of the $36 million cut, was reduced to the federally funded service level. It wasn't terminated completely because I there's outside funding for it, but it was cut significantly. 6.4 million was taken out of that. We've also stopped funding the Women Helping Women domestic violence diversion program and the domestic violence school.
Okay.
Those are in the $36 million reduction. They're kind of a sampling of what the non-mandated services are. There are others to be considered, but that would, in the TLRC's recommendation, be a part of the annual budget process for consideration based on funding. And if we can kind of control some of those other out-of-home care costs to a better extent, that would free up capacity potentially within the levy for those non-mandated services. But that would be an annual question, potentially.
Yeah, I think we need to be able to answer these questions before we move forward. The person might say, why am I paying more and we're getting less?
And we're getting less.
And then you're saying, we think, and we'll get back to you. I think we should at least have something that this is what it would look like. If we go to this, this is what would be serviced and this is what wouldn't be serviced. I think just having at least a framework, and I think you've started it, but I think that's very important so that we're on the same page. Because whatever we advertise has to be implemented. That's the problem with levies in general. We advertise, and then the people get it and they have buyer's remorse and say, I thought I was funding X, Y, and Z. So that would be good. But thank you for your work. I know it's super complicated. I like the rate card. I hope that gets it because we've got to do something. I mean, I know prices and stuff is going up, but it's just that jump has been unbelievable. When you look at, we were celebrating December 2024 and then crying December 2025. And this was money in the reserves, and we combined two levies. And it didn't even last the whole cycle, if you will, levy cycle. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Dreehouse.
Thank you. I too want to thank the committee, the subcommittee. I want to call you all out by name because I know you've put in hundreds of hours. I don't want to go higher than that. I'm not sure of it, but you've put in many, many hours of volunteer work to get us to where we are today. And I know it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to do this work. So Gwen McFarland, who is the chair of the TLRC and the subcommittee, Dr. Jenny O'Donnell, who did the presentation, Eric Landon, who is in the audience, and Rabbi Barr, who is also in the audience. Thank you very, very much for your commitment to this work. And Lisa Webb, of course, who is on staff and guiding all the work and providing all the numbers and trying to keep things on track. So I thank you for the thoughtful recommendations. They're thoughtful, they're smart, they're holistic. You've given us short-term things to think about, long-term things to think about. You clearly have done a very deep dive with JFS to try to understand where the spend is, what has already been done through $36 million worth of cuts to services that we had been providing to this community by way of children's services, and where we are now and what that looks like moving into the future. I want to note too that you had 2 public hearings, was it 2? Yeah, and I appreciate, we will be doing public hearings as well, but the public hearings that you have done help expose the community to what we're talking about and expose you to that resource to help inform your decisions. So I applaud you for doing that. We will be doing the same, but I think it's really important to happen at all levels of the process. You have noted that prevention is part of the key here, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And then you mentioned the partnerships, and we don't always talk about this, the partnerships with the courts. And I saw Judge Bloom enter. Thank you, Judge Bloom, for your partnership in all of this work. But all of these dynamics are interplay with different partners throughout the county, JV Court being the most important of those partners. And so I'm intrigued by that and any work that's going on there to try to understand the needs of the kids, as you say, the acuity of those needs, and what the costs are related to providing services for those kids. So I'm glad that JV Court has been such an important resource. We seldom hear that, but I'm glad you noted it. And then, of course, the partnership, using a little bit air quotes here, with the state and the feds. At CCAO, the County Commissioners Association of Ohio, we have a list of priorities. It's not a very long list, and this is on it. We have been lousy at the state level in providing resources for kids in our communities. Not so long ago, when we were up in the legislature, Commissioner, we were last. And if you doubled the amount we did for children's services, we were last. And so under Governor DeWine, we've done a little bit better. So now we're second last. All right, that's progress. But I got to tell you something, the state is not doing their part. And this is a theme that we hear over and over again, related to property tax relief, related to school funding. Now it's related to children's services. It is tiresome and frustrating to rely on the state for partnership, as every other county commissioner does in every other state, and it's just not there. And it's very frustrating. And the delta between what you said was normal or average was like 42%, right? And we're what, at 18? 18. I mean, it's just lousy. And so we will continue to advocate. I can't tell you that I have much optimism about that, because we've been advocating for quite some time to the state. We need to change things up at the state level to make that happen. But that's another thing. And then the feds, who have come and gone as partners and can be very unreliable. And it's very concerning. So I appreciate the acknowledgement that there's advocacy to be done. We need to continue to do it, whether we're beating our heads against a wall or not. We still need to continue to do the advocacy and raise the alarms for the kids in this community, because that's our job. A couple of things I just wanted to highlight. Because we've all been in this space for a while now. I mean, we have known about this situation and the increase in cost of care, driving the increases of expenses to the community and related to the levy. I agree that kinship is something that is near and dear, it sounds like, to all of us. We were the forerunners on that. But I am glad that we are thinking about, now that the state has followed our example, this is good news from the state, and provided those kinship care stipends, just like the foster parents get, in order to incentivize kinship care, that we can pull back on some of what we are incentivizing locally, because they have stepped up. And so I'm glad that that is a strategy. I agree with that. I want to make sure that those kin stipends remain. And if the state were to pull back again, then we'd be in a different situation. But I agree with that recommendation and think that's a smart way to deal with continuing to promote kinship care and making sure those stipends exist, just not at our expense. Something that someone mentioned to me recently, I don't know if this was discussed at the TLRC, was this idea that when we bring kids into kinship care, they become part of the system. Am I correct? In other counties, they do not. And I was intrigued by, I didn't know that. And so to learn that, I don't know if the cost element related to that would be that if a child is in kinship care and has entered our system, there is a cost to that by way of the caseworkers, keeping track of that placement and some of the staff hours that go into that. If they're not in the system, we don't have that expense. And so I want to put that on the radar, because someone mentioned that the other day, and I had never really thought through that. I don't know what kind of cost savings there could be there, but I'm hopeful that we can give some thought to that. Was that mentioned at all in the TLRC?
Was discussed when we met with, the subcommittee did weekly meetings over 6 weeks with the JFS literal subject matter experts, taking on a variety of topics after the PCG report, digging in deeper. One of those was out-of-home care and looking at the cost of care. So we did talk about that in terms of the number of kids we have in care and how that compares to other counties, but didn't dive in specifically, I think, where you're getting at as to why that is and if there's anything we can do.
If there's any cost savings there. Now, I know this is nibbling at the corners because the real costs are at the bottom part of the chart. I recognize that, but I was intrigued by this idea. I had never heard of that before. And then, as you say, some of the costs are related to the length of time of kids that are in care, the number of kids that are coming into care, the services that are provided to those kids. And so, these are mandated services, but those entry points and exit points are variables. It's, as you said, Dr. O'Donnell, it's challenging because we know it's good for kids. We know this prevention piece is good for kids, and so it's really hard to get your mind around we could save some costs there because we know it's not the best thing, right? And therefore, we've got a recommendation to increase the levy so we can hold on to some of what we know is working in the community. So I respect that. More aggressive on prevention, and you said that, and more aggressive on the kinship. Also, this rate card is something else that's being lobbied for at the state level from the County Commissioners Association level. So that is definitely on the radar. And then this idea that we increase eligibility for the Title IV. Federal money, again, I know this is a juvenile court issue as well as ours, but I'm intrigued by that to know if we can, of the $35 million that we already get, if we can increase that dollar amount so that we can take advantage of some of the dollars that might be available for kids that are eligible. So I, again, applaud the work. I know you've thought through all these things. I, too, was going to ask the question about the cost to taxpayers, and you will get that to us, because to have the recommendation without that lens is challenging for us, because we're being asked to consider an increase, but the impact to the taxpayers is what's important from our vantage point. And so I would be interested to get that amount and see what exactly we're talking about, knowing that an increase is necessary. It's just a matter of degree. And again, I appreciate you all thinking through that in this recommendation to provide us with a baseline so that we can look at that and say, okay, that you're smart people, you've done a lot of work and research, so we need to consider that and then think beyond that as county commissioners. So that's really what I had. I have a million things, honestly, because this is complex and we need to figure out how we talk about this in a way that the public can understand and get on board with. But it's complex. But I do think that this community does understand that we, through JFS, are trying to do our best work to keep kids safe in this community. And in the end, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about keeping kids safe in this community and doing our best work. And so thank you for joining us in partnership to make sure that that is top of mind and that these recommendations reflect that. And some of the challenges and cuts are impacting that and how challenging that is, right? When we know that this prevention work is really making a difference. So anyway, thanks again for your work. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a few comments, not really questions. I thank you so much, all of you, for your thorough report. I can remember it being reported out that in 2015, that the consultants that say if we continue on this road, we may be in trouble. Well, we're definitely in trouble right now, but we're looking at positive interventions that can possibly take place. Just a couple things. The bottom list that you have are the congregate care that costs so much.
Yes, ma'am.
That's why Hillcrest is, to me, is so important. We don't have the money right now to do all the program that we need to do. We're trying to renovate it and all that to get it ready, but Hillcrest is an example of why this is so important to get that done. I looked at the non-mandated services that we cut, the 34 million. We have cuts in the staff. We cut the staff a little. I wish we had these numbered, but we had hiring slowdown, I should say.
Slow down, not cuts to staff, yeah.
Okay, so I'll talk about that at the end because I have a specific issue as it relates to that. But I think we need to elaborate more on kinship. Even though it doesn't cost us that much, we want to continue to do that. But I'm looking at a massive training for not only staff, and I mentioned this to John, we've talked about it as we relate to these services, but also those who have been on the edge of maybe I want to provide services, maybe I want to be foster care, maybe I just want to do emergency respite or something, and a massive training to let people know what's in it for them, what's in it for us, and make people more. Some people may not even know about kinship. I'm already taking care of my grandbaby and I could be getting some money for it. So to look at a massive training. I think what we said the last time when we voted about having the levy in May or November, this is the prime reason why I wanted it, and I voted for November, because all of this you're giving us, we would not have gotten it in May in time for a levy. So I just feel very much a confirmation that it should happen in November. And so you're talking about a renewal on possibly 60 million additional is what I'm hearing. We're really in a quagmire. I think that we want to provide these mandated services, and we want to convince the people, as was said earlier, that you need to give a little bit more money so we can make this happen. And how do we convince when you don't have money for your own children? We're asking you to give to other children. And that's the reason for all these hearings. I see we're gonna have more hearings, which is great. And so all we can do is tell the story, be creative, provide strategies, and we pray that people will vote the way we need them to vote, because in our general budget, we don't have any extra to give, but we will have to give extra, and those primary services that people in the community receive, we may have to reduce those. I wanted to know, and you don't have to tell me now, and John may already know it, but how many providers for these continuum congregate care are outside of Hamilton County or outside of the state of Ohio? Because the first thing I did when I became commissioner is to say, we got to keep our babies here. Unless they're a sole source, then we take them outside, because we sent some to Arkansas and area. So I would like to know, John, John, you didn't have to.
Yeah, Commissioner, so this is another area that I think JFS has done a tremendous amount of work. As you pointed out, I think when we had our placement crisis pretty earlier on in the cycle, we were sending kids out of the state, which is of course not best practice even from JFS standards. So we've actually worked really, really hard to bring kids into the state and keep them local. So I actually did a poll of data in the month of March to see how many kids total we have placed out of state. We have about 12 to 16 kids out of state. And those are very, very specific to high acuity, specific facilities that are specially designed for care for those kids. So we've really reduced the number of kids going out of state.
That is awesome. Thank you. And I think finally, it was mentioned, I think by Jenny, about the certification of the providers, and that's why that's not the only reason, but why we have an increase in our costs. But I think that might be a part of it. Certification is not that expensive, but if they know we need them, and it was said that they don't even put in for RFPs, a lot of them. They just sit at the phone and wait for a call that we need foster care. And their prices are really going up. So we need to keep the ones that are doing great and then try to recruit, as I said, new ones, which may come from that training that we talked about. Wonderful. Let's see. I see my papers like crazy. I think that might be it. We have some difficult times ahead, difficult decisions to make. I know you guys will continue to be involved in this and give us anything new that you have, and we will see what the people have to say when we have our hearings. So thank you all so very much. Appreciate it.
Can I talk next steps very briefly?
Nope. Okay. Sure, go ahead.
Christy, can I get that last page of the slide up real quick? This portion now concludes the TLRC's 16 months of work going into this review, going back to the start of the midterm report in fall of 2024. We have the PCG report, we now have the Clark-Schaefer report, and now we have the TLRC recommendations. This is traditionally the phase where the levy review gets turned to the commissioners for their portion as you make determinations and review all of that information in context, as well as your own public hearings for the sizing of the levy. These are just a couple key dates. I've worked with commission staff to determine 3 dates for public hearings specifically for this levy. That'll be June 18th at 1 p.m. here downtown. That date coincides also with JFS's Q2 financial report for 2026, so we'll have the context there at that hearing as well. July 14th, which is a Tuesday at 10 a.m., also here in the commission meeting room downtown. And then for people outside the community, people that can't get here during the day for meetings or get downtown, on Thursday, July 16th, there'll be a public hearing at 6 p.m. at the Central Campus in Bond Hill as well. That's 3 hearings for the community, providers, family, taxpayers to provide input on their thoughts on the levy. All of the information related to this, the report, including the report after this meeting is over, will be available online on the Hamilton County website on the tax levy committee page. It's just hamiltoncounty.ohio.gov/TLRC. We'll take you right there and scroll down. We'll have all of the 2026 Children's Services levy information presentations all there for the public to review as well. And then the last date for the commissioners, we have a meeting scheduled Monday, August 3rd at 10 a.m. also here downtown for the commissioners to vote on the ballot resolution for the levy. The deadline with the Secretary of State is to have the resolution and supporting documents to the Board of Elections no later than Wednesday, August 5th at 4 p.m. This last date gives that opportunity for the commissioners. As all 3 of you have mentioned, key is what is the impact on the property owners. The next step from here is a letter I have at my desk that will go down to the auditor's office asking for a millage calculation on this new TLRC recommendation. I have millage calculations already prepared for consideration. When we discussed this in January, we asked the auditor for millage calculations on the PCG recommendations, both for the May and November ballot. So we have those prepared at this point. I will do the TLRC recommendation amount as well as we go through this process, any other recommendations the the commissioners would want us to consider. It takes the auditor's office about a week or so to turn those around. In advance of that August 3rd date, any other amounts or any amounts the commissioners want to consider for the ballot, we will need to have a resolution requesting the auditor to certify millage amounts for any of those being considered. Those will come forward likely in mid-July to make sure we have those in advance for the commissioners. And then those are required for any option the commissioners want to consider to do as a part. It doesn't hold the commissioners to that amount by any means, but it gives you a suite of potential amounts to make your determination on in advance of August 3rd. Any questions or anything else on that?
No, not on that. Thank you. That's very clear. John, if I could just make a comment. I had mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about the hiring slowdown. And just specifically, I've been getting calls and inquiries as it relates to the time to speak to someone at JFS. I think now they get a message that says it'll be 400 minutes, 300 minutes. I don't know if people are thinking that the minutes sound better than 2 hours. I don't know. And then not getting in. I know you're doing great work, so I'm not putting you on the spot at all. And I also know that we have to be very careful as it relates to fraud and also error rates. If we go above 6%, then the state will look at taking money and all that. But I'm thinking as we try to get agreement by our residents to pass this levy, our service delivery has to be a little better than what it is. And I'm not sure, I'm gonna bring up AI. Even if we had used, and I don't know a lot about it, I use it, but even if we had AI to screen something before somebody got to a person or whatever, but I've been getting too many calls about people being on hold and not getting response. And then if we go out and ask them to pass levies, they're gonna say, I can't even get my questions answered. So I know you've been working very hard on filling vacancies and all of that. So I just wanted to throw it out and see what we can do to make that contact a little better.
Yeah, Commissioner, no, that's something that is high on the priority for JFS to reduce those hold times, especially on public assistance side. And believe it or not, that's one conversation that we're having with the state is surrounding the topic of artificial intelligence and just maybe some amount of pre-screening process by which calls are screened, especially if it's some simple answer that they're looking for, that an automated system will be able to complete that. But with anything JFS related, we need to get the blessing of the state and the state's IT, especially in the AI world where a lot of the data is, and the computation is done overseas. We need to make sure that whoever we select to do something like that has data centers based in the United States. And so there's a lot more, procurement processes that we need to get approved by the state. But that is definitely a track that we're talking about and looking into.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes,
Thank you, and thank you for raising that. I had heard that same thing, that maybe AI could be a tool used particularly related to the federal cuts to SNAP. We didn't even talk much about that, about how we've got some looming challenges because the federal government has reduced the amount of money they're paying administratively to administer SNAP. So that's on us. The state provided a little bit of relief, but for the small counties, it was substantial. For the larger counties, not so much because of the distribution formula that they used. However, we got some money. We're grateful for it, but there was a significant gap. So we've got that to make up for. And then this error rate that you referred to, if we find ourselves above the 6% error rate, we don't know how that's going to be handled by the state. That would be a statewide issue. If we've got error rates above 6%, then how we deal with that is going to be a topic of conversation at the state level. So the fewer employees we have, potentially, the higher the error rate goes, right? Because we don't have as many people screening, and it just becomes more difficult and challenging. So we have worked, Commissioner, and you mentioned it's so hard to pay people an adequate wage, particularly the frontline people that are doing the intake, that are doing the children's services work. And to go backwards here is, deflating for us, and never mind for them, for the employees. And so I am hopeful that once again, we can shore this up because we've got some looming expenses perhaps coming our way. I know our error rate fluctuates just like it does in every county, and sometimes it's zero and sometimes it's more. But man, oh man, would that be a hit? So I just want to lay that on the table too, because that's another challenge that we might face by way of expenses. So, thank you.
thank you. Okay, thank you all. Appreciate you coming, for sure. Thank you. All right, we have one additional item on our agenda for today. I make a motion to go into executive session pursuant to Ohio Revised Code, Section 121.22G4, to discuss collective bargaining.
Second.
Commissioner Summer Dumas?
Yes,
Commissioner Reese?
Yes.
Commissioner Dreehouse?
Yes.
thank you.